What it be, what it do, it's your boy Fringe History, back with another Empire review. So I've been working on a project over the past 2 weeks, aka this video, because I wanted it to turn out just right. Hopefully that positivity sticks around. Now, where were we again? Ah yes, Arabic empires. We're not getting into any religious stuff this episode, so don't worry. I'm sure a few of you just cringed when I said the word religion. Some of you still are now. Ha 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 ha. This channel really is one for only the coolest people. Please laugh, I'm desperate. Look, I'm really trying hard here to make 13th century Arabian geopolitics interesting, okay? It's not as easy as I make it out to be.
The Ayyubids.
The Ayyubids. What can we learn from them? Rhetorical question, so take a look-see here. By the way, for all these, I'm gonna skip some big gaps in the history because it won't be that important, because if I didn't, we would be here for hours. Let's begin. The actual dynasty in and of itself was named after the father of Saladin, who you may have vaguely heard of before in one way or another. All you need to know about him is that he hated the Crusaders. His father isn't important, but Saladin is, and wouldn't you know it, his dad is now dead, and Saladin is in charge. Saladin is known as one of the greatest Muslim leaders of all time because of his fantastic military skill in commanding soldiers in a way that would arguably best the Europeans at the time, and he used his skill to create a territorial wall, if you will, as a united Muslim front to prevent any crusaders from dancing in. In order to properly do this, he first swept northern Africa, western Arabia, Jordan, Mesopotamia, and more. However, like all things, Saladin too died in 1193, which did something weird. It essentially allowed for different families within the empire to enjoy relative autonomy, making it this sort of confederation of lords and vassals to a point. It was still an empire, though, just without a main government. However, not everything was that peachy for that long. Dun dun dun! Eventually, the Crusaders broke through and got their mitts on Jerusalem in 1229. To further complicate things, the various families began to bicker again and led to more strained tensions. Eventually, Ayyubid Egypt kicked the bucket when the Mamluks grabbed power in 1250. Keep in mind that I said Egypt, not the whole empire, because the Ayyubids still held on to a few little tchotchkes of land in Syria, which is where they were pushed back to. Sort of like if the US got invaded and our government still lived on in, like, Alaska and Hawaii. It's still us, just far away from the main meat of our culture and society, but alas. Also, they battled frequently in Egypt in ports along the Nile River, and also the Crusaders were in the north somewhere, I think? I don't know. But then, who's that I hear? The Mongols! In 1260, the Mongols came a-knockin' and really crushed the Ayyubid Syrians. However, the Mongol Empire was infamously known for not staying together for very long, so when it split up into four main food groups, the Ayyubids were lumped together with the Ilkhanate. They survived under the thumb of the Ilkhanate until they were conquered later in the 1400s. Ripperoni pepperoni. Today, they are mostly remembered for their leadership under Saladin, one of the greatest military commanders of all time, masterful military tacticians, and also were big fans of Sunni Islam, not Shia. There's a huge difference there that I will not get into here because I don't feel qualified to do so and it would be uncomfortable for everyone. Also, I don't think I need to tell you this, but their empire is shaped very weirdly. I'm just putting that one out there. We all notice it, okay? Don't deny it. So, you want to know about Tlemcen, huh? Well, take a seat. So Tlemcen was a Muslim kingdom along the northern coast of Algeria, made up predominantly of Berbers, the native ethnic group of the Sahara. Anyways, the city of Tlemcen was unlike many other towns in Algeria, in that it wasn't along the coastline, but situated a bit farther inland. You have to remember that Algeria is almost entirely desert, so most settlements took advantage of their proximity to the Mediterranean, but not Tlemcen. All that mattered was that the land was fertile and elevated high up. So here's where our main guy comes in. So this cat named Yagmarasin ibn Zayan was the busybody de facto ruler of Tlemcen. At this time in the mid-1200s, the Almohad Empire was crumbling apart, and Yagmarasin knew this was his time to shine. In 1235, he declared independence and became sultan. In this new Tlemcen he found himself in charge of, he looked after mostly simple village people and nomad-type people, caravans and whatnot. At the time, life was good. He took great care of his people, who in return looked up to him as a protector of sorts. But then he was finna die and didn't want to let his kingdom turn to mush, so he told his son Uthman to expand the place if he needed to. Uthman did just that. Under Uthman, Tlemcen began to attack some of its neighbors. From Uthman onwards, Tlemcen wanted to expand and took great lengths to attack the kingdom to the right, the Hafsids. Tlemcen was always fighting with its neighbors to the west, however, the Moroccan Marinids. Both the Marinids and Tlemcen would play a tug-of-war in the region, frequently invading one another. Sometimes the Marinids would get far in, sometimes Tlemcen would get far in. It was a mess. To top it all off, nomads from the south, who weren't really affiliated with either of the two, would invade to take grazing lands. Later on, the Marinid Sultan Abu Yaqub Yusuf an Nasser, try saying that 5 times fast, led a very successful invasion into Tlemcen, during which time he built a new city called Al-Mansura, which quickly took off because it stole all of the trade in the region and really peed off Tlemcen. Quickly skipping a few generations, the new sultan died, some revolts happened back home, and Tlemcen knew it was time to get their thunder back. And by that, I mean in 1307, they completely destroyed the city and wiped it off the map. Thankfully, now with that out of the way, Tlemcen's population rapidly grew again and got back into the limelight once more. However, things weren't very hunky-dory for very long, because in the 1330s, the Marinids attacked once more, again. After 2 years of non-stop conflict over the city, Tlemcen fell to them. Yeah, I know, it's sad. But things weren't quite done yet, for you see, the sultan that did the conquering, a Marinid sultan named Abul Hassan, received attaboys from Muslim leaders all over. However, he forgot to learn from the best and just kept on conquering more and more North African kingdoms, and was far too dictatorial for ruling over such a large and diverse area. And so they rebelled. They were only independent for a short period of time before being recaptured again. Abul Hassan died, his son stepped up, which also only lasted for a few years before he too died to death, meaning that a new sultan would be installed in Tlemcen, a real one, Abu Hamu Musa II. He reigned for nearly 30 years, mostly marked by general peace and skirmishing with the next-door Moroccans. However, the Marinids eventually overtook Tlemcen again, which lasted for barely any time because the rebellion was just too strong. Tlemcen never really recovered over the centuries, and would be passed around by Marinids or the Hafsids like a dog toy. Eventually, Aragon from Spain also came in and tried to invade around the 1500s, which was seriously undermined by the Ottomans invading in 1554. Under Ottoman rule, Tlemcen lost all of its importance, and nobody really cared about it that much anymore. RIP. Tlemcen's legacy is a fancy one, alright. At its cultural peak, Tlemcen was known for having prestigious schools, luxurious desert motif, and full of mosques. They also got a lot of money from trade because it was the middleman between gold coming from Mali down south and West Africa, and when it entered Europe. They were an intellectual powerhouse in the Muslim world at the time, and in its crowded bazaars, people would sell all sorts of things like fabrics, rugs, leathers, and stuff from the sea, which is weird considering they weren't by the sea, so I don't know how that works. Mahra, let's jump in. So remember previously when I mentioned how the Ayyubids controlled some land in Yemen, from the map? Well, after the Ayyubids crumbled, there was a power vacuum left in Yemen. Various Arabic tribes in the area were left to compete with each other, and lo and behold, a winner emerged, the Rassalids. However, the Rassalids were not permanent and led to a lot of strife with the other tribes and dynasties. In this case, the Ba-Dujana family took power rebelliously after they stole power in a port city. The Rassalids didn't just sit around, they came in and were ready to secure their position. Unfortunately for them, they kind of sucked, and the Ba-Dujana grunts resisted and won. Another country close to them, Kathiri, attacked them, hoping to take them down. The Badujana goons won again. Eventually, the Rassalids took a nosedive and collapsed. In their place came, guess who? That's right-o, the Tahirids. After some fighting, the strategic city of Shir was taken under control of the Badujana, which was a huge victory for them. In 1480, the Mahri Sultanate took a voyage to the island of Socotra off the coast of Somalia and used it as a base to use as a surprise tool in conflict. In 1495, the poopy hit the fan when tensions among Arabic tribes turned into a civil war in the Sultanate. Kathiri supported the rebels who defeated the Badujana family. LOL out loud. In place of them, the Zuaidi and Afrari dynasties were propped up and, in exchange for the rest of the Mahra Sultanate, gave Kathiri the city of Shir. Things were relatively fine in the region until 1507, when an external threat came knocking at death's door: Europeans. Portuguese sailors eventually rolled up to the shores of Socotra Island and soon after rumbled with the Mahra Sultanate people there. After quite a brutal battle, the Portuguese managed to steal the island for themselves. The Mahra Sultanate couldn't even reconquer the island themselves. It took until 1511 for the Portuguese to just up and leave the island because they couldn't make it work there. Fast forward a few centuries to the arrival of more whiteys, specifically the British. In 1834, British naval officers and Mahra Sultan Fartash, Fartash, agreed to let the British go there whenever to store coal, apparently. However, none of this ended up happening, and the Brits and the Sultan ended up bickering. A few decades later, the new Sultan ended up allowing Mahra to become a British protectorate, which basically meant that the British owned them. Eventually, during the 1960s, Arab nationalist groups took over the Mahra Sultanate, and it was absorbed into the Soviet-backed South Yemen. What a tale. And now, Mahra is no more. So the Marinids of Morocco, huh? We talked about Tlemcen before, but let's look at the other side. You might be getting some PTSD from last time with all those crazy events happening, but things happen. You can see their flag in the corner there, kind of a cool signal. Anyway, shmanyway, let's take a gander. The Marinids were the first part of the Almohad dynasty in the area, but the Marinids showed their worth to old pops when they helped the Almohads conquer and win battles in Spain. That's a common trait among Muslim empires invading Spain. They had to cross the Strait of Gibraltar into a new continent. Ew, yuck, no thank you. Anyway, since they weren't just completely part of the Almohads, just sort of like a beta orbiter type of meme, the relationship began to be filled with tension as the two would frequently bubble with each other. In 1217, they tried to blitzkrieg through Morocco, but mountains stopped their progress. So in response, the Marinids just sorta waited there for nearly 3 decades. Puppy guarding, what an age-old tactic. These 30 years would be crucial, in that so much changed. The Almohads had severely weakened, Christians began to reclaim more and more of Hispania, Tlemcen was acting up, you know the drill. Now that their big brother was on its knees, guess what the Marinids did? Just take a stab. Yeah, that's right, they invaded and took over a bunch of cities. Eventually, now that the Almohads were without any major cities and cripplingly cornered, the Marinids did away with them in 1269 after they nabbed the Almohad capital, Marrakesh. The Marinids were now the dominant force in Morocco. The Marinids then decided to take back Spain again, so they got a little area of land in Iberia, which is the name of the peninsula that Spain's on. Once there, they began to fight with the Christians in Spain, and supported the Muslims there. Now that they were again conquering much of Spain, they also controlled much of the trade as well, since the Strait of Gibraltar was now under Marinid control. Around this time, the Marinids reached a golden age, where intellectualism flourished and education and quality of life was great. Along Spain's southeastern coast was the Emirate of Granada, a Muslim kingdom left over from the Muslim conquest of Iberia. Granada will be featured later, so we'll talk more then, kid. The Marinids helped support Granada and assisted them in resisting Spanish attempts at invasion. The Marinids sorta turned into North Africa's police in a sense. Now high on power, the Marinids and their sultan wanted to unify the whole of the Sahara under Muslim rule, in specifics, theirs. They first laid siege to Tlemcen. Remember when they were going through that? Now that they were gone, the Marinids next move on to the Hafsids, who were 2 doors down from the Marinids. Well, to the right, I mean. You get it. This didn't last for very long because a confederation of Arabic tribes in Tunisia revolted, and Marinid rule over Tunisia and West Libya faded out of existence. Also at this time, Castile in Spain was wising up and managed to make several crushing defeats against the Marinids, whose only foothold in Iberia now was a few small cities. In the 1340s, the Sultan Abu Inan Faris was assassinated, and the Marinids began to lose steam rapidly. All of the political figures began to violently compete and one-up each other, causing instability and what was basically just anarchy at that point. Local tribes began to invade as well, taking bites out of the empire. To top it all off, the ghosts of the families disposed in their conquest of the East, like the Hafsids, came back to get their revenge. Their final moments were marked by a lack of money, Europeans stealing their coastal cities, and a mass execution of the new royal family. After an overthrow in 1471, the Marinids were no more. These are always so dark. This one's gonna be a bit shorter, but that doesn't mean it's any less interesting. So the Sultanate of Touggourt was founded in the 1400s by some cat named Banu Jalab. Touggourt was a sort of successor state to the Marinids, despite not having any land that the Marinids had, but whatevs. Because of this, Touggourt modeled everything they did after how the Marinids did it, a copycat if you will. It's sort of like how Russia claimed to be the Third Rome, or the Roman Empire's true successor, video coming soon, despite not having any actual claims. Yeah, historians, come and fight me, I don't care. Am I gonna apologize for it? Not really. The Russians were not it. Anyways, one of the people in the Jalab dynasty, Solomon ibn Jalab, was the first legit leader, not just some figurehead in Touggourt. This was because he was related to the Marinids, apparently, somewhere in his bloodline, so therefore, big kahuna. Grandioseness achieved, he got the help of local tribes, bringing the Sultanate of Touggourt into this world. He began to set up a group of council members that he personally appointed, and even created a small army of a few hundred horsemen. In 1552, shortly after its foundation, the Regency of Algiers, a state up north, basically told Touggourt to become a vassal to them. The Regency of Algiers was already a puppet state of the Ottomans, so I guess that would make Touggourt, like, puppet squared? Algiers wasn't taking no for an answer, so they marched through the Sahara to capture Touggourt themselves. All throughout their journey, the Ottomans spared no expense in capturing and attacking local cities. The Sultan of Touggourt was some scrawny 16-year-old kid, so he was probably terrified that the might of the freaking Ottoman Empire was coming after him. When the Ottomans arrived, they shot cannons at the city in siege for 4 days until they broke through. Touggourt never stood a chance. They then captured the Sultan and really pillaged the place. Sorry. Touggourt was incorporated under Ottoman rule for the next few centuries until the French stole it in the mid to late 1800s and lumped it in with their Algerian colony. The end. And North Africa never had any problems ever again after that. Not once. Not any problems. Not at all. Granada is one of those cases where it's a sort of remnant state type of deal, but what? You ask to me? Well, it's Córdoba. We'll cover Córdoba at the end, so don't fret. Okie doke. So Granada, as you can see here, was on the Iberian Peninsula where Spain was. Granada was the result of the previous Iberian Muslim kingdom, Córdoba, getting wrecked by the Reconquista, specifically Castile. So in 1246, Muhammad I ibn Nasser, the first leader of Granada, signed over their independence to Castile. In exchange, Castile made them what's called a tributary state, which means that they pay money and homage to Castile in exchange for them not getting bungled. So they're sort of puppets, but kinda not. All throughout the 1300s, Granada tried to lay siege against the city of Ceuta multiple times, which is located along the Strait of Gibraltar in North Africa, but barely held on to it for more than a year before the Spanish came in and said, no, 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 no more of a dat. Despite Granada losing territory after the Marinids fell D-Day, Granada stayed mostly unified until the very end. One of the reasons was because of the Sierra Nevada mountains that protected them, not the ones in Cali, the Spanish ones. How do you do, fellow West Coasters? Things aren't so bad here in the east. A bit cold, a bit wet, sans palm trees. Grenada had a huge population at the time because they didn't discriminate against who wanted to come in. They accepted Muslims from literally everywhere and had a relatively stable government, even having a good quality of life and religious education. Grenada was very connected with trade in that they were in between the Mediterranean and the Sahara. This allowed them to be a hub for the Saharan gold trade and the Mediterranean trade, which traded just everything. Unfortunately, not everything was puppies and pretzels for them. Two things began their major decline: the Portuguese and marriage licenses, like everything. At this time, Portugal was already sailing around Africa and setting up small colonies here and there that dotted the coastline, making Grenada less and less useful for trade and commerce. Also, after Castile and Aragon merged in 1469 after the marriage of Ferdinand and Isabella, they wanted to invade Grenada and take back native Spanish lands. In the end, however, it would be Grenada who would make the first move, for some reason. They attacked Castile promptly in late 1481, which was the start of a grueling war that everyone just wanted to be over and done with already. Whatever tiny upper hand Grenada might have had disappeared when they fell into a civil war because of, well, long, complicated reasons. Finally, after lots of fighting on both sides, Grenada fell. The last Muslim influence disappeared on the Iberian Peninsula in 1492. Later that year, Castile and Aragon would go on to do some more conquering, just not in the Iberian Peninsula. After almost 800 years of non-stop conflict, the Reconquista had finally ended. If you're wondering what happened to all of the Muslims from Grenada, I'll tell you. They realized that a Christian Iberia would really not be the place for them, so they packed up their bags and headed for North Africa. Most of the time the transfer was violent, but sometimes it was voluntary. Why didn't I do Córdoba first? Well, put simply, it's because I'm dumb. Room is what's next. Don't call them rum, or gin rummy, or Rumpelstiltskin. That's kinda mean, it's just room. That name comes from the Arabic name for Rome, which is what Rome thought of itself was the rightful successor of the Romans. The origin is rather silly. So in 1071, the Byzantines lost the Battle of Manzikert, where they were fighting against the Seljuk Turks, their mortal enemies. One of the Seljuk's top commanders, Suleiman ibn Kutulmish, decided to keep some of the land for himself instead of for the good of the Seljuks. So that's what he did. In 1077, after breaking away from the Seljuks a bit previously, he declared the existence of the great and powerful Rome. He made his capital Nicaea, now called Iznik. Nicaea was a city that he stole from the Byzantines, so I'm sure that wasn't awkward. Suleiman's grand reign lasted only for a decade before he was killed by a Seljuk, so that didn't take kindly to his separation. So his son, Kilij Arslan, stepped up to fulfill his father's duty. However, Kilij was almost immediately faced with Duki when the Crusaders tried to invade in 1096. Rum was pushed back into central Anatolia, the name of the peninsula that Turkey is on, and Kilij switched the capital to the city of Konya. A few decades later, in the 1150s, Rum's territory was in nearly all of Anatolia. The new Sultan is Arslan II, and his job is to finally sweep up the remaining tribes and tiny sultanates in the area and absorb them into Rum. He does his job. In 1176, he won a battle against the Byzantines, further grabbing their territory. A few decades and crusades later, a civil war breaks out in Rum. Oh no! The sides are light versus dark. Arslan II versus his evil brother, Suleiman II. Suleiman II wins, and Arslan II is deposed. Dun dun dun. Suleiman II starts off his reign by invading the Kingdom of Georgia to the northeast, which is just a horrible idea. First of all, Georgia has quite the reputation of just being totally BA. Secondly, Georgia is in the Caucasus region, which is known for being like hella mountainous, which is something that nobody wants to march their troops through. Georgia's queen, Tamar, very speedily got an army ready. The Georgians attacked Rome's army, who were waiting there like sitting ducks. Rome promptly lost for obvious reasons, and Georgia repelled the invasion, if you can call it that. The next year, in 1204, Suleiman II croaked and was replaced with his kid, of course, Arslan III. He was overthrown near instantly with a guy named Khosrow I. This guy is more important. Under Khosrow I, Rome reached its peak, having captured many important cities, including a port city along the Mediterranean and southern Anatolia. Eventually, in 1214, his son Khosrow would go on to capture more port cities, like Sinope along the southern coast of the Black Sea and Trebizond. This will be a future video. By the 1220s, Rome was a real formidable force, not just some backwater dump in central Turkey. Unfortunately, their Ottoman-like growth came to a halt when an enemy from the east arose. Yes, that's correctamundo. Mongols. The Mongols swept through eastern Anatolia and took the city of Erzurum with ease in 1242. A year later, Rome knew that it was only gonna go downhill from here. In just a few years, they lost multiple strategic cities and large swaths of land. They surrendered and became a Mongol vassal. The Sultan fled Rome and died in 1246. Without a true leader, Rome was divided up into different states controlled by different sons. It was very messy, and they all went on to do their own things. In 1277, Big Papa Mongolia was defeated in Anatolia by the Egyptian Mamluk general Baybars, swapping the Mongols for himself as the leader of these disunited states. Eventually, he just gave up and left, since it wasn't worth it to continue defending a bunch of ungrateful turds. The Mongols came back in charge, and, well, the rest is history. Mongol history. Not part of this. Ha ha ha. Cordoba. Córdoba. Córdoba is another one that's in Spain, not in the Middle East or North Africa. Yo, spin this. So at the time in the 700s, the Iberian Peninsula was ruled by a people called the Visigoths, the same barbarian tribe that toppled the Roman Empire. Now, Spain is real close to Morocco, specifically around 10 miles if that. Separated by a strait of water, the Umayyad Caliphate made multiple attempts to cross the strait into Spain and go on conquering from there, with mixed success. Eventually, in 711, the Umayyads busted through Visigothic defenses and broke in, pouring into Iberia. The Visigoths were really outnumbered against the larger, more experienced Umayyads, who defeated them and were now able to conquer Iberia. And so began Córdoba. Their capital city was of the same name. All was well for about 40 years until the Umayyad Caliphate was overturned by a new rising caliphate looking for power, the Abbasids. Understandably, the ruling family of the Umayyads were like, "Get lost, posers." In response, the Abbasids hunted down everyone in the dynasty of the Umayyads and had them all executed. Nothing like a good old family purge. However, the one that got away was a guy named Abd al-Rahman I. He was an Umayyad prince who fled to Córdoba since it was far enough away and relatively protected by water. Now on the lam and the throne in Iberia, he defeated local Muslim rulers to truly confirm his power. For the next century, power over Córdoba was always a bit shaky since they were surrounded by people who wanted them dead, like Christians, Francia to the north, the Abbasids, you name it. Skip a few centuries to the early 900s. The emir is, well, Abd al-Rahman III. He knows his little emirate is going to poop a duke anytime soon, so in a last-ditch effort to save it, he proclaims himself caliph in 929. Not an emirate now, a whole caliphate. Almost immediately, this new caliphate of Córdoba faced problems. For one thing, the Fatimid Caliphate from down south was intimidating them with an invasion since they were longtime rivals. Another issue was that nobody actually accepted him just calling Córdoba the rightful successor to the Muslim caliphates. To the rest of the Muslim community, Abd al-Rahman III was just some kind of kooky guy in exile that escaped capture, set up shop in Iberia, and started ranting. Thankfully, not much happened, and Córdoba was on its own once again. They fought their bigger war against their enemies, the Fatimids. They were encroaching into Morocco, so Córdoba took it upon themselves to intervene to halt any further advance. Around this time, other European powers and Christians saw that Córdoba wasn't like the other Muslim kingdoms, so since Córdoba just wanted to survive and do their own thing, that's kind of just what ended up happening. Relationships increased. Córdoba also started raking in lots of money for themselves, so that was an epic win for them. However, Rahman III died, and his son Al-Hakam II stepped up in 961. He was similar to his pop in that he wanted to still pursue peace with his neighbors. He was big into education, so Córdoba became an international center for the arts and science, math, and religious teachings. Like all things, he died in the year 976. He had nobody else to step up as caliph other than his 10-year-old kid, so a bumbling 4th grader became ruler. What ended up happening was that all of his top advisors basically did his job for him, and also his mother was with him to give him advice. How cute. Over the following decades, opposition to the caliph grew. After a Christian revolt brutalized Córdoba, however, the title of caliph became strictly symbolic. Now, there's a power vacuum with lots of different people bickering and fighting for who was really caliph. For the next 2.5 centuries, Córdoba broke down and became a group of small kingdoms fighting with each other. Out came Granada as their half-breed successor state. Remember we discussed them a bit ago? Now it's all clicking in, right? Now granted, Córdoba's fall and Granada's start weren't back-to-back, but I think you understand. You're smart. Hot dog, this was a strenuous one to make. I want to thank each and every one of you for watching this one and waiting all this time. The script was long and the animations were even harder. If you can't learn something from this, then I don't know what to say. I don't have a clever quip. So again, I will see all of you next time. This has been Fringe History, and have a great day. Bye-bye-bye-bye-bye-bye.